Welcome to the February 13th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting, Lower Makefield Township Planning Commission meeting. I guess we'll do roll call first. How do we do that? We just do. I guess. Is it Dawn Stern, you're here?
Here.
Okay, TJ Gill's not here?
Correct.
Okay, Tony Bush
I'm here.
and Colin Coyle, welcome.
Present.
Okay, and I'm Adrian Costello. So we have four of the five, so we're good to go. I guess the first item in the agenda is approving the minutes from last meeting. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of the January 9th meeting.
Second?
Second.
Okay. We have a second. Is there any discussion points, questions on the minutes? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, 4-0. All right, and the only other item we have tonight is the 1101 Big Oak Road project.
Mr. Costello, I'd just like to note for anyone who might be listening in that the application for 1273 Lindenhurst Road major subdivision that was second on the agenda after the upcoming one is postponed to March 13th, 2023. So if anyone's listening in, that'll be on next month's Planning Commission meeting. That's agenda item number 4.
Okay, I guess we'll turn it over. We turn it over to you, Andrew, Tim.
I'll do it.
Okay,
Thanks. Good evening. I'm Ed Murphy. Here tonight on behalf of the applicant. To my immediate left is Kristen Holmes from Holmes Cunningham, the project engineer. To Kristen's left is Terry Nardone, one of the principals of Triumph Building Group, who is the applicant. A little bit of background, since there has been some time elapsed since we were last present, which was exactly 5 months ago tonight. We were here September 13th of 2022 when we made the initial presentation and reviewed the first round of review letters that we had received at that point. In the intervening 5 months, a number of things have happened, and a handful of new review letters have been issued, which we've had a chance to take a look at. Those review letters, we've had a chance to talk to Jim about, Andy about, and we're prepared to talk about further this evening. But if those Planning Commission members, either present or virtually, will recall, one of the threshold questions that was raised last meeting involved whether or not there was the presence or absence of any wetlands on the site. Since then, I know Jim's been out. We've had consultants go out. I think other township members have been out, and I think everyone is, again, or still comfortable that there is no wetlands anywhere present on the site. The revised plans that Kristen submitted and which triggered the most recent reviews from Andy's office, from the EAC, and from the fire service director, addressed many of the other comments that were in the prior review letters and which were commented upon in September. I can report to you tonight that if we want to take them in the order in which they were received, the January 12th review letter of the fire service director on the second page, it suggests we need to add one additional hydrant at the corner of Derbyshire and Big Oak Road. That's a will comply, which I think puts any concerns outlined in the January 12th letter to rest. So that is a will comply. Similarly, we've seen the January 29th letter from the EAC. And I think if everyone supports the waiver, the recommendation in the EAC regarding the nature and type of plantings being recommended, we can accommodate, but to do so would require a waiver for the nature of the plantings, I think is the simplest way to say it.
Jim, I don't think we saw that letter.
I forwarded that on to everyone this afternoon. If you'd like, I can give you a copy.
That's why I didn't see it.
Ed, can you elaborate a little bit on the nature of the plantings?
Yep. Give us 1 minute and everybody's organized, Andy. We will.
It's in the packet.
Yes. After the Remington verdict letter.
It was
the very
attached to,
last
it was attached to the Remington verdict. No, I didn't.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah,
Just want to make sure we're following along.
I didn't get that yet. Okay. Oh, see, I don't know that I saw this. Okay, sorry about that, Ed.
Okay.
Before we begin, the initial request was a waiver from the tree replacement ordinance. That's now been modified under the new waiver request letter.
Right. I'll let Kristen explain what we understand to be the suggestion made by the EAC and how with a partial waiver we could comply. And I think it would answer Andy's question as well.
Sure. So within the EAC letter, they support providing large shrubs and small understory trees within the wooded areas as replacement trees. So the partial waiver request that we're asking for as it relates to tree replacement is to allow for that substitution of those smaller understory and shrubs as a replacement tree, whereas the ordinance calls for 2.5 to 3 inch caliper trees of specific type of shade trees. So it's really, in essence, the ability to substitute for those types of plantings that the EAC supports. And we do feel we'd be able to meet those replacement tree plantings within the property.
So I'm going to ask you a quick question. EAC says the plans calculate 205 replacement trees. So is it the applicant's position that 205 understory shrubs or bushes be planted in lieu of replacement trees?
Correct, yes.
So the total would stay the same. It's just depending on the species.
Right. And if no waiver was granted or recommended, physically, we could not accommodate the total number of 205 trees on the site. We can do so with the smaller variety as recommended by the EAC.
And this helps to supplement and actually improve the woodlands, the quality of the woodlands, because right now it is just all taller trees. So being able to add in some of that understory and shrubs helps to supplement what's out there and I think provide a nicer wooded area.
So same number of plants, but you worked with the ESC to come up with a mix that worked better for you guys and the ESC was happy with it.
Yeah, we didn't have much conversation with the EAC. They came up with that idea on their own volition and we're prepared to accept it.
Okay.
I want to clarify, just so everybody's on the same page. Well, 205 replacement trees, we're not talking about, 200 shrubs and then 5 trees. I think that a good mix of trees of 2-inch caliper size and large shrubs would be something that we would find acceptable on a landscape plan. Not something where, we're going to replace all the trees with just shrubs and then throw in a couple of trees at the end.
You're way more devious, Andy, than we are. Hadn't even thought about that.
Is it, so is there a specific number in mind of roughly?
We don't have a specific number in mind, but our landscape architect already reviewed it and we'd probably be looking at doing like 20 foundation plantings around each house, which would be the larger shrubs. That equates to 120 overall, the 6 lots, and then a mixture of those trees and shrubs throughout the wooded areas for the remainder of that number.
So it's almost 50-50, a little bit off.
I mean,
And we'll be happy to provide the breakdown so everybody can see.
honestly, like my answer would be, my answer to that would be if the EAC signs off on it, then I.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Shocking.
And so if the EAC does it, I guess the only other question I would have, and maybe Jim, you might be able to at least offer some perspective is, does this set some sort of precedent for the tree ordinance that we ought to highlight to the board of supervisors that other people are going to come with the same solution?
Well, this is something we've talked about possibly modifying that ordinance slightly to allow for something like this. However, currently, it's a waiver request that they're requesting. So in order to do this, you have to grant a waiver. Of course, that's within the purview of the planning commission to recommend that the board do that if you feel that this provides an acceptable alternative to just solely trees.
So if we were to, after all this, we were to approve this, would it be, Barb, would it be appropriate in our motion to highlight the fact that this is a waiver that the Board of Supervisors should consider and take seriously, because it could be precedent setting?
Well, you would have to do that with all the waivers that are outlined. And at this point, I'm pretty sure the supervisors are aware of some of the limitations or issues with the tree replacement with respect to prior development applications that were appealed. So I think the EAC's position is an attempt to overcome those issues.
Yeah, and that's, I guess this is maybe for me as a plan commissioner, I'm sorry to derail this a little bit, but I've been in my 2 or whatever years, I'm pretty vocal about my position on the ordinance and waivers to that ordinance. And I think for my position, I'd be okay with recommending it as long as, oh, sorry. I'd be okay with recommending it as long as, you know, they know I would like, as a planning commission, some clarity on how they view this. Is this a new precedent or is this a one-off?
Well, maybe you put a finer point on it. This applicant's come in with this request at the suggestion of the EAC because the number of trees couldn't be replaced on that site. What I think you're saying, and I would agree with, is I wouldn't want the developer to come in on another site where there was space and say, hey, by the way, I don't want to put the trees in. I'll put shrubs around the foundation instead. That's different than what's happening here.
I know.
Okay,
I
so,
just
yeah.
want to make sure they're clear on, I guess my request to them would be to clarify their intent if they approve this as well, because they're the ultimate.
Yeah, and also to the point of a precedent, obviously, anytime you grant a waiver, it should be based on the specific property you're looking at. It's not just blanket.
Yep.
Every development gets this. It's a site by site
Because
basis.
there's a very, like, my myopic self could have just said, nope, we have an answer to you. If you don't have room for the trees, just put the difference in the tree bank. And I'm just recognizing the fact that, and I have said that to people before, and I'm recognizing the fact that, okay, like, the EAC coming back and being on board with this solution has a level of credibility in my mind, because I know where their sort of position and priority is with the whole ordinance. So I'm willing to think about that, but I'm just, I guess, raising that concern that I would have, that it just, the board should clarify if this is, you know, exactly why they would be approving this and what the unique circumstances are that would do that. So just sending a message to future developers, this does not mean you can come in here now and ask for that for anything.
And just so you know, for a waiver, the applicant has to present a hardship to the property similar to like a zoning variance.
Okay.
So that's going to have to be on record as to why that waiver requirement is being
All right.
requested.
All right.
You could also grant the waiver contingent upon approval of the plan from the EAC and the.
Yeah, that I would put in for sure.
And a township, you know, and the landscape architect at the township engineer's office.
Okay.
And you could say, I just had it on the tip of my tongue. You know, subject to the review of the township in consultation with the EAC.
Yeah.
So that we all are on the same page.
Okay. All right. We'll revisit that when we get to a motion.
Okay, the only other new review letter, as I hinted at when we started, was Andy's letter of January 31st, which hopefully is in your packet. And as I also previewed, Kristen has had a chance to speak to Andy as well about his comments. And Kristen has also updated and revised the waiver letter. Although candidly, I think the waivers that we reviewed back in September are pretty much the same as before. And I think Andy already provided his opinion back then about those waivers that he would support, and those he had a couple questions about, one of which we just talked about, which was the tree replacement issue. But in the main, the review letter itself of January 31 is a will comply letter. We have no issue with those the lingering review comments that Andy has outlined. And if now's appropriate time to just really touch on the waivers again, we happy to do that. Andy, you have any things you want to talk about before we just review the waivers again or not?
The only thing that I would bring up is, there's a couple of comments that we had discussed as far as the location of utilities to individual lots, for instance, lots 5 and 6, and how that was going through existing trees and it having an impact on the woodlands on the site. And when I had received a revised plan or a newly updated plan that shows the trees that were diseased or dead and how the utilities for lots 5 and 6 avoid all of the trees that are going to remain on the property. And so I would have a problem. I would not have a problem striking comment 1 from the letter, just based on that information alone. The other items are, I believe, largely can be addressed without any major impact to the plan. And so from a stormwater management perspective, or I don't see how there's any way that they could comply with the comments that we had and that have a major effect on the plan. So I just wanted to say that and get that on the record.
Before you get to the waivers, Ed, you had said it was the comments were generally will comply. Is there anything that is not a will comply? Oh, okay.
That probably might be a good idea. Just at least, I mean, like, just going through the waiver list. I don't know if anyone else has comments or thoughts on this, but there were some, engineer supports this waiver. There were a few of them, but there were some that weren't. And it might be a good idea just to go through and just make sure the 4 of us are clear on what Andy's recommending and what the other thoughts are if we're not
All
recommending.
right, so I'll let Kristen talk about it. Looks like the first one, Adrian, is number 3. And Kristen and Adrian commented that there is no italicized comment that says township engineer supports the waiver. Just highlight that one, and then Andy is free to comment as well.
So I'm sorry, what numbering are we going off of?
They're in your order of your review, Andy, the
Okay.
waiver number 3.
Okay.
This is,
Requesting a
sorry,
waiver
so
from the specific plan procedures outlined in the ordinance?
Yes,
And,
Yes.
and,
correct.
yes, Andy, that's the one.
and you want to explain how you're deviating from that?
She was about to, yes.
There we go.
Yeah, so the ordinance outlines a certain procedure and process as you go through the subdivision and land development process. So with this application, we did informally submit a sketch plan to Jim to just get initial comments back, and then went forward with the subdivision and land development application. So it's just a slightly different, less formal process as outlined in the ordinance as we're getting through these steps. And we did end up having a site visit at the site with the EAC as well. So did end up having that site visit in a different order, I would say, to the process outlined in the ordinance. So it's I would say
Highly technical to me. I wouldn't even bother to mention it, but
As long as Andy and Jim are fine with that one, I mean, it's just, and everything's happening the way, at the end of the day, everything's happening.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
I
would
would-
couch
I-
it as a partial waiver. It's,
Yeah.
they've done
Okay.
what they needed to do. It's just not exactly following the ordinance.
Perfect. All right. We don't have to, for something simple like that, we don't have to belabor it, but okay.
the next one, it looks like number 5 in your list, Kristen, which again, for Andy's benefit, follows the same order as in his review, right?
Correct. And that's just showing existing features within 200 feet. I would say it overlaps with waiver request number 2, which requires a 500-foot overlap, which Andy did note his support there. So I would assume a similar support for the lesser 200 feet.
Andy?
I would support that.
Okay.
The features that they're showing, I'm able to fully comprehend what is happening on the site and what's happening around the site, and therefore I don't have any issues with that.
And they have provided aerial photography that pretty much shows everything in the surrounding area.
Before we move on, Andy, number 2, at some point, I thought I remember hearing, it must have been our last meeting, that people in Falls Township were concerned towards the back end of that, of the development back there within 500 feet of the site. And quite honestly, I don't really remember all of their concerns, but there were some. And so should we be, they're looking for a waiver for 200 feet, 500 feet. Is that really something we should do, given that we had heard some complaints at the last meeting when we addressed this?
To my knowledge, their complaints in Falls Township had mainly to do with stormwater. And I think that the grade of the site falls away from Falls Township. No pun intended there with the language, but and so I'm not concerned with the stormwater runoff from the site in any direction, as they've provided revised calculations that demonstrate that they're reducing it from what's running off the site now for each of the individual lots in the back there, and then also for the combined 3 lots up front. So, and then as far as site distance out of the driveways and things like that, they're meeting those requirements as well.
Thank you.
Kristen, you want to talk about number 6? And again, I think we talked about this before, but why don't we review where we stand on number 6, and then Andy is free to, and Jim are free to comment.
Sure. So it's just a partial waiver from providing a full environmental impact assessment, which is required for more than 3 lot subdivisions. So it's a partial waiver because we are providing a lot of the required information within the plans and subsequent reports that all have been filed as part of the project. We have just haven't finalized it into a formal EIA report. So between the documents and the narratives, we have provided a substantial amount of the requirements.
Given the additional information that they've provided in the recent submission, I believe that that's something that we could support.
I guess the question on that is that I would have, and this may be a little possible pushback, is because is this just essentially putting the onus on the township to sort through all of the information and put together their own environmental impact assessment rather than the developer doing it? If all the information's there, isn't it theoretically just somebody's got to pull all the information out, make sure all the boxes are checked, right? Sorry,
Yeah.
I asked more Jim and Andy, probably because you're the closest to it. Is this just putting the burden more on the township employees rather than the developer to do the same work?
I don't think the township's doing any of the work. We're doing the work. Township.
No, I mean, yeah, and this is just a little administrative work. I know, like, I'm not trying to imply you're not doing it in any of the work,
Yeah. Okay.
or maybe it just doesn't happen. I'm making a Mountain Avenue motel. So,
I think some of the information that we've provided is actually more detailed.
Yeah.
For certain pieces of it than would go into the EIA based on the comments that we've gotten from the neighbors and so forth. So I think this one has been driven based on the concerns that we've heard to make sure that we've addressed all of them
okay,
with the different documents that we've provided.
okay.
I have
Yeah.
a question. Instead of doing a formal EIA, is there a way to do some sort of synopsis?
That's
Says
kind of where I would.
Utility or, soil conditions, see report such and such. Like some sort of roadmap that if there is a question, the township has easy access to pull it up and say, oh yeah, it's right here.
We could, I'm not, but Kristen could, if that's meaningful, do a summary of, here's what the EIA would otherwise require. Here's where you can find the information responsive to it.
That's kind of where like my
Right.
note here was.
As long as
it's in
that's
there
not
when I
burdensome
just-
to Kristen,
summarize
then
it.
we'll do it.
You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying like, refer
We'll do that.
this type,
That-
because it makes it easy to have the.
that's all I was
information
asking.
right
Okay.
There.
that- Yeah.
And
I
once
hope-
again, to
I
the
hope
specific site thing.
Yeah.
A lot of sites require new roads going in.
Right, okay.
So, that it's like the level of scrutiny that you have is higher because, well, where are you putting these roads and
Yep.
how are you doing it? Whereas, I think you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I just asked the question because that was my first thought was essentially exactly what Barb just asked.
Yeah, and again, I don't know that we're asking for a substantive waiver. It's more of
Yeah.
a procedural, how
That's-
we package it more
Yeah,
than anything.
That's exactly right.
If it's packaged in such.
We'll do something.
That's like a little.
you.
Okay.
checklist Type thing.
Thank you.
And then I think the only other one, and the one that is new, waiver from the 5 months ago is the one we have already talked about, and that's number 9, where we talked about our willingness to incorporate the recommendation of the EAC outlined in the January 29th correspondence, provided we get support for how we qualify or quantify the number of trees to be replaced and what the appropriate or approximate breakout between full size and understory, smaller shrubs and plant material.
Yeah, and it does in their waiver request letter mimic the EAC letter where they do talk
Right.
about understory trees and shrubs. So it wouldn't just be shrubs.
I guess the only thing to clarify.
And we will provide that breakdown as we talked about earlier.
I guess the only thing to clarify is the number of trees to be replaced. And that's based off of, the developer's arborist went out there and determined the number of diseased or dead trees that are on site. I don't know that the township has anybody that's confirmed that.
Well, this time of year, it's kind of difficult to confirm
Right.
exactly which trees are actually dead and dying. Ultimately, they will be responsible for replacing any and all trees that are not dead and not seriously diseased and dying. And that final number would be verified by the township. And then they would have to show that on the plans that are ultimately recorded.
So just clear. So what I'm hearing is the tree count is not final yet.
Kristen can comment on that real fast. The status of the arborist report.
Right, and I would say since the initial report was filed, we did have a site meeting with EAC to talk through the trees. And it was a few recommendations were come out of that. So the arborist has since gone back out to the site and marked the trees that are dead, dying and diseased. So that if anyone wanted to go out and verify or check those, they're able to. And we will have an updated supplemental report that we'll provide with the resubmission that helps further clarify those trees from his report.
Okay. All right.
What are you looking for from us this evening? Were you looking for a combined preliminary and final approval?
Yes.
All right. So if you're,
I just want to interrupt, just so we're all clear. And Ed, are you verifying that all the other reports that were issued by the township's fire service director, safe engineering, are going to be, will complies?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it's clean because when you came, it was a conceptual review, so.
I guess that was one question I had, but the driveway, there's gonna be 2 separate driveways, right? Onto Big Oak Road? I was a little confused. I thought one of them was saying combine them and another one was saying don't combine them.
Yeah, so we're going with the traffic engineers review where it's to
Your
maintain-
traffic engineers.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
maintain what's being proposed. We have one shared driveway for 2 lots and then a single driveway, which is in the location of the existing driveway.
Correct.
Give me. That's what I thought you were coming up with, but I did see the.
That's what your engineer recommended, and we're gonna incorporate his recommendation.
On the topic of driveways, if we could humor the new guy for a second, I want to step back. Andy, you had talked about environmental impact when you were talking about the exceptions to the 200 and 500 foot reviews. We got on the topic of Falls Township, right?
Yes.
Lot 6 borders onto Falls Township. You had talked about stormwater being the concern, no concerns on runoff. That is a driveway right on that property line. And driveways don't grade toward a home. So the driveway's grading away from the home. And just, we're sure that that's not a concern. We've reviewed the necessary runoff.
Kristen can speak to that, Colin, and also it relates to some of the implementation of the EAC recommendation as well. Those two sort of go hand in hand for a reason. Kristen will explain.
Yeah, so the placement of the driveway on each of these lots was placed to go around existing trees in order to maximize the preservation of trees as much as possible. And as part of, I guess to go to Ed's point, as part of the tree replacement that we're talking about, we are intending to use some of those replacement trees along that shared property line so that those neighbors do have some buffering to the new lot. And then in addition to that, from a drainage perspective, yes, we have we're collecting and grading so that it is all draining to the rear of each of the lots. And there are individual stormwater facilities at the rear of each lot. And we've, I would say, overanalyzed this in the sense that we have a point at each lot to ensure that we aren't increasing the flow from that respective lot rather than as a whole property.
Thank you very much.
So there, just quick question. So there is an existing driveway and they're just adding one more driveway. So there will be two driveways that go on to Big Oak.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments or thoughts? Nope. Any public comment out there?
We have 2 public comment online.
Okay. All right. Who's first?
Bringing in Douglas now.
Okay. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay,
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, I apologize. Apparently I had to hit *6 and I can hear you. I'm just attending this thing by phone and I appreciate it.
No worries.
My name is Doug.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, my name is Doug Marshall and I live in Yardley Crest, which is the adjacent development to 1101 Big Oak Road. So I'm familiar with that property to some extent. And I did, have some thoughts about this. And the first thought I had was that any developer like Triumph would have reviewed, the township's relevant ordinances and codes regarding limitations and restrictions about building. And I think Triumph would agree. It understood that the township had a 25% tree preservation ordinance as part of the code. Now, from my point of view, I would respectfully submit it is not fair to the community to assume that you're going to be granted a waiver or various exemptions, whether it be putting in trees that have a much smaller caliber, or maybe, putting in some shrubs. Living near that area, I can tell you that, for example, the proposed house number 6 is woodlands. I can't attest to how many of the trees are healthy or not healthy, but it is home to, in fact, that area there is habitat for a number of wildlife, foxes, deer, rabbits, the whole gamut of animals. And I I personally, of course, value that. And I imagine that these restrictions and that code, are part of the review process, because any number of commission, whether it be the zoning commission, EAC, planning, the board of supervisors, they put in that 25% because they recognized and appreciated the value of open space, trees, wildlife, habitat, et cetera. And again, I agree with that, and I think many people here in the township do as well. And I'm kind of uncomfortable, frankly, with this idea of substitute vegetation, simply because it just sounds to me like it's second best. And furthermore, is it really that easy, or should it be that easy for a developer to supersede what is in the code? I don't feel that that's appropriate. I do want to say this. Look, I support the free enterprise system. I understand that Triumph wants to maximize its profits here. I do understand that, but I don't think that desire, again, should be more important than the existing woodlands that are there. And the real question I have in my own mind is what is the Lower Makefield Township's perspective here? I mean, do you kind of bend over in favor of the developer to give it an additional benefit of the doubt so it can build as many houses as it wants? Or is it your position that the developer has an obligation to stick within the code, and if it doesn't, then okay, you don't build 6, you build 5 houses, and you still make money? So those are the thoughts I have, and I appreciate you're giving me a chance to attend here remotely. I thank you again, and look forward to what happens.
Okay.
I just want to clarify that the developer is not seeking a waiver from the 25% maximum disturbance of wooded areas. The development as shown meets that requirement.
Well, but then why has there been discussion about replacement trees?
That's a code section that replaces the existing trees that are being removed.
Right, I understand that, but then, I mean, what you're really saying is that there really is no 25% preservation ceiling. It's completely fungible. I mean, either it exists or it doesn't exist.
I think I hear Andy saying, and what I'm assuming from based on the waivers that have been requested, this development obviously is going to have to take some trees down. The amount of trees that are coming down fall within or less than the 25% requirement. But the township beyond that, even though that 25% has an ordinance that requires some level of replacement and or funding of other replacement around the township. And the only waiver we discussed around that was giving them some flexibility based on the EAC's recommendation of using non-standard plantings to meet that requirement.
Well
Right,
said.
and the way the township sees it is that by granting this waiver, that allows all of the plantings to be planted on the development and on the site, as opposed to planting, a lesser number of trees on the site and then providing a fee in lieu of where those trees would be planted somewhere offsite.
I'm glad for the call for that clarification, because there could be others with the same misunderstanding. But if the request was to go past the 25%, it would have probably been a different discussion today.
Agreed.
Okay.
And we
Actually
actually,
be a variance.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, I may have misread the original EAC letter, but I thought they had indicated that they did not see how the developer could put in 6 homes and remain within the 25%. I mean, that's my recollection.
That may have been the prior letter. I don't believe
Yeah, but
that's in their newer letter.
nothing has changed. Yeah, nothing has changed since then. I'm looking at the schematics here. You've still got 6 homes there.
Well, the EAC did make a site visit along with the applicant's engineer and their arborist and walked the whole site, which I think helped solidify and clarify their comments somewhat.
So I understand your concerns and we have, I think what I'm hearing is we have professionals on the township, under the township's employment that has confirmed the conclusion that that part does fall under, within our parameters and we have one resolution with EAC sort of backing of, how do we make sure we plant what we're supposed to plant?
Okay. I mean, I can only say, and then this is my last comment, because I certainly want to allow things to move along. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but when I look at the schematic here, and I look at all 6 houses with the surrounding lawn and driveways, that certainly seems, at least by my eye, to exceed 25%. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I do have astigmatism. I do have, corrected lenses on, but it just doesn't seem to compute to me. But, again, that's what I'm seeing here. And maybe I have to literally go pull up Google Earth and go to a mathematician or something. But it just doesn't make sense to me. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Well, I think that the disturbance is 25% of the existing woodlands on the property. And there's a significant portion of the property on lots 1, 2, and 3 that are not woodlands. And so that open space there, areas where they're not disturbing woodlands up there, that would not count.
This is Lisa Hanson speaking. I'm here to assist my client, Doug Marshall, and I was put into the wrong room, which is why I wasn't able to help him when he was referring to the 2 different sections, which were originally addressed back in August by the engineers for the township with regard to the 25% and the tree replacement requirement. So that's where that originally appeared. And I think what Doug is stating is that we've been trying to keep up, and we thank Jim Majewski for the extra help he's given us to provide us with the materials from that time until now. And we are wondering how it got from this statement from the Planning Commission's engineers that for dwellings 4, 5, and 6, the proposed utilities that would pass through areas that counted at woodlands would create would be disturbed by such utilities, and that the applicant wouldn't be able to count those areas as preserved woodlands and would still need to preserve woodlands in another location to maintain the 25% maximum reduction. So maybe we missed it or we don't understand it. But how has that suddenly disappeared or not been addressed and not part of the waiver? Why are we just talking about the kinds of trees that are going to be replaced? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the utilities that are going to lots 4, 5, and 6, some of them have been moved to where the driveway is coming into the property. And then others are, when on the original submission, it was a graphical representation of the utilities and the location of the woodlands. And it did not necessarily show all of the existing trees in that area. Once that information was provided where the existing trees were, and it demonstrated that the proposed utility lines going to the houses would remain outside of the drip lines of those existing trees, then that constitutes no disturbance to the trees or the woodlands.
Okay, so the appropriate body, the zoning commission and or planning commission, has confirmed that there's no longer this issue with violation of 20-0 51B6.
Lisa, this is Barbara Kirk.
Yeah. Hi, Barbara.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So comment 1 deals with zoning. The applicant either has to modify the location of the utilities so it meets the requirements of that zoning section, or has to go to the zoning hearing board to get relief from that section.
Correct.
So
I
that's the
understand.
one of the 2 things that has to be done. So as part of their application, they have to meet the requirement of that section of the code.
Okay, and what we just heard is by movement or change with respect to placement of the utility lines, that is no longer an issue with respect to the percent that's being preserved. Excuse me.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just asking for confirmation.
I believe that's the accurate because of the relocation of the utility lines. There's no longer an issue with disturbance of the woodlands.
Okay, and for my benefit, Doug may already understand this, but I'm a little bit confused. There was recently one of the plan sheets was provided to show by the arborist where the trees are that appear to be diseased. I think
So
it's
it's not a plan.
119.
Yeah, it's not a plan it's not a report that's been completed yet. But the
Okay.
applicant has indicated to the township that their arborist went out to the property and marked certain trees with colored ribbons or spray paint, orange for a dead, dying, or diseased tree, and red for a tree that arborist determines to be hazardous.
Okay, so can someone explain to me why the arborist is recommending removal of 119, but with respect to removal, with respect to replacement by providing 205 trees, it's for removal of 40, and I get it's mid-size, so it's ×7. But can you explain to me, I couldn't figure it out myself, how those numbers align with the 119 and this picture? Can you explain
So if
that?
yes, because the way the code is written, if a developer is removing live trees that otherwise are viable, those trees have to be replaced. And obviously, if you're removing a tree that's 6 feet in diameter, you're not going to be able to replace it with a tree that's 6 foot in diameter. So there's a different calculation as to how to replace those trees. You do not have to replace trees that are designated as dying, dead, diseased, or hazardous that are going to be removed anyway. So that's where the numbers don't match.
So the 119, they're diseased, they're going to have to be removed anyway. So the waivers being requested with respect to the 40 healthy trees that were under the ordinance required to replace by 11 of them by ×7, right, for a total of 77. That's where the waiver is being requested. So instead of replacing with 77 live trees, it's going to be a combination of trees and mature shrubs and smaller trees.
No,
Right, so the 3 tranches were removal of 27 that were the smaller caliper, which would require 4 trees to replace each of those for a total of 108. Then there would be 11 in the mid tranche that would have to be replaced, and by 7 for each, which is a total of 77. And then 2 of the very large ones, or the largest ones.
Lisa, what are you reading from?
Well, I made this myself based on the numbers in the waiver letter and the response from the EAC. So I looked at what the requirement was in the code, depending on the size. So there's a basic tranche, and then there's 3 tranches based on the diameter or size of the tree. And it says for each of them, how many trees have to be substituted to replace one of the ones coming down that are healthy. So if you're taking out a total of 40, the division is 27 in one tranche, 11 in the other tranche, and 2 in the other. It's a total of 40. And so the idea being that in the ordinance, there's a times number of live trees that have to be replaced for each one of those. That's how you get to the 205. So I'm just trying to figure out what I saw in the letter was that it was the middle tranche of the 11 healthy trees that they wanted to reduce down to not have to replace 3 of those. So it'd only be 8 of those that have to be replaced for a total of 56 that would still be replaced. So I'm trying to figure out this idea of a small shrub and or tree combo. Does it apply to all of the original 205 requirement or not?
It was a recommendation by the EAC that there be a replacement of understory trees or large shrubs to be determined, I presume, by the township and subject to EAC approval in lieu of planting 205 trees. The EAC issued a letter dated January 29th, 2023, which is an update from their earlier letter that sets forth when they went out and looked at the property and made certain recommendations. I haven't done the actual calculations. I rely on the EAC because they are
Right.
extremely diligent.
Yes, and they say that the waiver for providing 21 replacement trees for the removal of 3 existing 18 to 30-inch trees. That tells you it's that middle tranche, which requires 7 replacement trees for each of 1 regular tree of that size. So that's 21. There was the letter obviously pointed out the discrepancy between 21 versus 28, which is the difference between 7 and 8 trees, right?
I'm sorry, may I interject? The
Yep.
EAC's letter of January 29th states that the statement of 21 replacement trees for the removal of 3 existing 18 to 30-inch trees is erroneous and should be updated and removed. So I don't know where that language came from, but the EAC is saying that that's no longer accurate.
Correct. And I believe you're looking at an older waiver request letter where we had those older numbers, whereas we've updated that letter since to reflect the 205 trees.
Right, and the total of 40. But what I'm asking is whether it's 21 or 28 is irrelevant. That's not my question, and I'm sorry if I'm not being clear. My question is, out of the 40 trees to be removed that are under the ordinance to be replaced by 205, there's 3 different size categories of trees. Based on this letter, which is out of date, I understand, it looks like the waiver was only with respect to that middle tranche of trees, that middle size of trees, right? Whether it's 21 or 28 replacement trees. The original tree that's healthy is either 8 or 7. So what I'm asking is, this waiver that's being granted, is that only with respect to what this says? The list of waiver requests on both sheets continue to state they're erroneously, right, blah, blah, blah. But what exactly is being waived? The requirement with respect to all 3 tranches of mature trees, or is the
waiver,
engineer going to be able to pick and choose as they would like with respect to which of the requirement of the statute specifically based on the size of the trees is going to be applied?
the waiver that's been requested, and I ask you guys to clarify if I get any of this wrong, is there have been 40 trees identified already that are going to be removed, healthy trees that are going to be removed. The EAC is on board with that, and they understand what those are, and they helped come up with a workable recommendation that allows for replacement trees and replacement shrubs. And I'm fairly certain our motion for approval will include having to verify with the EAC that the final proposal meets their requirements. That's the only thing that we are considering today in terms of a waiver.
Okay, so
Okay.
together there'll be a decision about, of the 27 of one size being removed that are supposed to be replaced with 108, maybe some of those will be replaced with something other than a tree of that size. Similarly, of the 11 that are going to be removed that are healthy, would have been-
You're getting into a level of detail here that there is not yet an answer for. And what I would recommend for you honestly is, could the group that is going to be between Jim Majewski and Andy Pokel and the EAC, they will be representing the township's interests in this. Work with them, make sure they understand what your concerns are, and they're the ones that are going to have to implement that.
Okay, and that's great reassurance. I think my point is that there's wiggle room here for the way that this cat can be skinned. And I think my client and other local residents would like to see, in those instances where there's a waiver granted with respect to what type of vegetation is replacing something that's being removed, consideration be made to the maturity of the tree and the things that a mature tree provides, right?
Well, I think-
Versus a sort of shrub or planting. And I am trying to be respectful. I mean, I understand there are going to be experts and people who deal with this all the time working together. I'm just speaking up to say that that would be appreciated if it wasn't just take the the largest tranche of trees and replace it with small ones because it fits the plan and where the mature trees are or aren't around where they want to put the houses.
I think that I had a very similar comment at the beginning of the meeting, and, you know, Ed had indicated that I was thinking deviously that I didn't want that to happen where where they're replacing the 205 of the 205 replacement plantings, that, you know, only 10 of them are trees and the other 195 are large shrubs. I think that we're all on the same page, and it's all very clear that that's not going to be the case.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's reassuring, and thank you for letting me take up so much time. It took me a little while to explain my question and comment, but I appreciate it. And, you know, I always like to consider when there's issues around removing trees and replacing trees, is the famous saying that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And the second best time is now. So I'm just going to say that because I think it's a great proverb. It's been around for a long time. And thank you for your time. And again, thank you to Jim Majewski and also to Barbara Kirk for helping me get my feet wet and get the information I need to help and assist my client. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Was there another caller or no? One more. He pointed at me, so. Okay. All right, so I guess I'll entertain a motion at this point.
So I'll be nice and make a recommendation if this commission is inclined
I'd be,
to make a motion to recommend approval of the preliminary and final land development and major subdivision plan as presented, subject to compliance with the comments as set forth in the engineer's review letter of January 31st, 2023, and the other review letters provided by the EAC, Office of Fire Service Director, and Township Traffic Engineer, with a recommendation that the supervisors grant the waivers as requested by the applicant and as more fully outlined in their revised letter dated February 13th, 2023, subject to these conditions, that the partial waiver from providing an environmental impact assessment be granted, subject to receipt of a summary of the assessment items set forth in the various documents to be provided by either the applicant or the project engineer. And that the waiver of replacing the replacement trees as recommended be modified to permit the planting of understory trees of a size smaller than 2.5-inch caliper or large shrubs, subject to approval by the township engineer and Mr. Majewski with input from the EAC. I said as recommended.
They're gone now? Okay. All right, they're talking behind you. All right, does
We
anyone-
accept those conditions.
I'll make the motion
Okay,
that Barbara just articulated.
does anyone want to second that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, is there any more comment, question, concerns before we vote?
Being entirely new to the matter, I prefer to abstain.
That's it. I mean, you're as up to speed as anyone, I think, right now.
Mhm.
And, all right, so, I guess I call the question then. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 You're gonna abstain?
I am, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
all right, I got 3 ayes and 1 abstain. Okay, well, I guess the only other thing to do is, anyone make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
Anyone second?
Second,
All right, all those in favor?
aye.
All right,
Gentlemen.
we're done. I did it.
Yeah.